The next option we'll see for narrowing types is using good old instance of. So instance of is an operator that hopefully you're familiar with, or at least you've heard about before, that will tell us if somewhere on the prototype chain for a given value, if in this case date exists on that prototype chain, or the prototype of date. It's a long, really awful thing to explain around prototypes, but essentially we can use this to tell if some value is an instance of some class, if we're working with classes. It still is not going to do anything for interfaces or type aliases. Those don't exist in JavaScript, but it will work for classes or for things like arrays and dates, anything that we instantiate using the new keyword, right? So new date. I mean, technically you can make an array this way. Most of us don't, but it's the same thing as doing this. And so we can do, instance of is an empty array, or is this array instance of array? It is indeed. Is that an instance of date? No, it is not. So we can use it within our TypeScript code to narrow the type, and TypeScript is able to figure out what it means and how it narrows the type. It's able to understand our code when we use instance of. So if we have some function that let's just do what I did in the slide here, print full date, which is going to accept a date. We'll call it D. No, we'll call it date, which is either a string or an actual date object. So of course in here, date could be one of those two. And what I want to do is either call the fancy date method, which is if we just show an example of this, if I do new date, I'll call this D. D will have this method toUtc string. And if I execute that, we get this nice date string. So I want to call that toUtc string, but of course I can't because that doesn't exist on a string. So I can't just narrow it using type. Well, actually, that's kind of a lie. I could use type of to get the string side of things. I could check to see if type of date is string, then we'll do something. If it's not string, then we know it's a date. But I'm going to use instance of. If date is an instance of capital D date, then let's print out date.toUtc string. Great. So in here, of course, TypeScript will know that date, that parameter, must be of type date because that's the only choice that we have between these two things. And then else, it's going to know date has to be of type string. So then we can make like a new date object from our date. And then we can save that to a variable or print that out or something and call .utc string on that. Let's just print both of those out. Okay, and there we go. So a very simple, silly function, but it accepts a date in two formats, which actually is relatively common. We'll work with date objects, but a lot of the time we work with date strings. So this is a union that is certainly not the first time that you might, or the only time you might encounter this union type. Anyway, we're using instance of to narrow down the type, and TypeScript can follow along. It keeps up and it says, oh yeah, I know if you make it here, you've got to be of type date. So we could use this for classes too, right? If I do something like, custom classes. If I make my own class user, and let's just say it has a constructor in there that says you've got to have a public name or username. That's a string, and that's it. Okay, and I need my curly, there we go. And then I can make another separate class called class admin, class company. And there, each company has just a name, which is a string. Okay, so if I want to write some function called, print name, and it accepts some item or some thing, some entity that is either of type user or company. And now these are classes, right? And here I have a couple of options, but I can't just say if type of entity is user because it's an object. That's an object too. So I can use instance of. I could use in. I could say if username is in entity, then we know for sure right here that we're dealing with a user, right? Because we're looking for username. Or I could say, let's say they both have username. They both have name. Sure. If that's the case, then I have to use instance of. If entity instance of the user class, then in here, we know that we're dealing with a user, right? And then else, we know, or TypeScript and us, we both know that entity has to be of type company. So that's using instance of. You use that in situations where type of won't cut it. You're working with some sort of class or something you instantiate with a new keyword. Then we can check to see if somewhere along the prototype chain, blah, 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 user.prototype exists. But really, it's just a way to say, is this thing instantiated from the user class or the company class? Is this thing instantiated from date, or is it just a regular old string?